So I'm now going to move on to successes, and I've got a list of 6. It's not all doom and gloom, and I'm sure I haven't got them all. In no particular order. Screen readers, I think they're a success. I think MathJax is a big success for mathematical content. Nemeth Braille, I think, is a big success for the encoding of math in a tactile form. Pretext, I'm sorry, Bob, I think that's also a success. HTML plus ARIA, I don't remember what ARIA stands for, but it's essentially the audio styling that allows it's sort of how to navigate information. And I regret that I'm very ignorant about that, but I think that's a success. It's been told to me that it's a success. And at the Open University where I used to work, they had a unit, I think they still have, might still have it, that had trained volunteers read mathematics out for students to listen to. So it wasn't machine recording, it was human recording. Now we have, the Open University has perhaps 2,000 students for each presentation of a course, and the courses might last 15 years. So getting nice human recordings is actually a big effort, even if it doesn't help the early disabled students. So those, I think, are successes. And any more to contribute? Successes that we've missed?
Well, not so much a success, but I'd like to ask a question, perhaps directed to Rob, who's been involved in Braille output. An issue with Braille and also with sign language for the hearing impaired is that they're highly regional. I have a friend in Belgium who tells me that even within the small country of Belgium, there are several different mutually incomprehensible sign languages. So what is happening with Braille? Are you concentrating exclusively on American English Braille? I have no idea whether the Braille used in Britain and Australia, Canada, and so on is the same, or is it different?
Yeah, it definitely varies by language. So French Canadian would be different than the rest of Canada. I think I read that there are like 64 different Braille, they call them codes. I mean, we all can figure out what the problem is. There's either 63 or 64 characters when you count the number of ways to turn the points in the cell on or off. Nemeth, is like it's like tech. You have a 2-cell code that says, okay, we're moving to Nemeth now, and then all those 63 characters change their function or their meaning. So, and Sean can correct me on any of this that I don't get quite right. There is UEB, Unified English Braille. Grade 1 is probably what I think of as the naive version of Braille, that there's a direct mapping from cells to the characters or letters in the Latin alphabet that we're used to. It is really much more like LaTeX with a markup. You have like a shift, you have a character that indicates a shift, like a shift key on a keyboard. You double that character and it's like doing a caps lock on a keyboard. That's called grade 2 because you also have contractions like THE. Like I see it as in the ASCII mapping, I see it as an exclamation point. I can read BRF, Sean. I can't read cell 236. I don't speak that version of Braille. My understanding is that UEB has tried to do some math, but it's what I would call school mathematics. So what you would be, if you were teaching a 5th grader arithmetic or something like that, it's just not really very capable. So Nemeth is really the only system that I know, that I'm aware of, that really does, I'll call it higher mathematics carefully. To answer your question, Nelson, we're using LibLouis to get UEB grade 2. We're using MathJax to get Nemeth. And the basic idea is that because pretext is marked up so strictly, we rip out all the literary text, we rip out all the math, We process them with those two separate tools, and then we just put the whole package back together again where everything came from, which is harder than it sounds. Does that get you going? But yeah, what we're doing is not going to help somebody in France or Belgium, or perhaps, I don't know about the UK and Canada, what the standards are there. But
about 5 years ago, there was a shift from the English, the American system of Braille, to the UEB, which is a Unified English Braille, which brought the whole code into more of a unified system with other English-speaking countries in the world, and it made it more automatable, if I can make up a word there. And it lends itself better to software-aided transcription. And what we're using, we use transcription software, and we also use like Empty Reader and MathPix to get to do large chunks of like large textbooks, large sets of stuff into Microsoft Word, which we use the MathType, and that translates directly into the Braille, using like a styles-based system. So Braille is very formatting oriented. So each style of text, like a heading or a paragraph or a list, will have a certain cell it starts in and the carryover to the next line. And by where those start, a person will know exactly what type of text that is, whether it's a list or an exercise or a heading 2 or a heading 1. So they just know from where it starts. So, and that's all based on the styles in Word transferring to the translation software.
I'd like to come in here briefly on what you said, Sean, which is, I didn't realize Braille had that feature. It sort of reminded me a little bit of Fortran, that has sort of columns with special purposes, but it also reminds me of a Unix text formatting utility called TROF, which has dot codes at the beginning of each line. And it also reminds me of Markdown, where the headings, the beginning of the line in Markdown, again, has a very special role. And you're saying that in Braille, the, so to speak, sectional divisions always occur at the beginning of the line and nowhere else.
I had an interesting progression of how I got into LaTeX from working on a class that was doing scripts for screenplays. And there was a blind student who had trouble with the visual formatting, and we stumbled on a language called Fountain based on Markdown. So it was able to format with commands, text commands, as opposed to formatting with visually. So he was able to format his in this Fountain language, which was just a derivative of that Markdown you're talking about, which I think is related to LaTeX, right? Markdown.
We'll get to that later.
Okay, I get ahead of myself.
I'll come up again. That's all right.
Jonathan, what you were just saying about sort of the beginning of the line and Fortran and TROF, my understanding is it's more about indentation. So as a blind reader would move their finger down the left margin or the first couple of cells, they recognize that 2 cells is the beginning of a paragraph. A 2-cell indentation, something like a nested list, is going to have greater and greater indentation as you go, but you have to be careful because a list item, you only get 25 characters across an embossed page. Is it 25 or 40, Sean? 40 lines, 25 across? I think that
25 lines, 40 across?
That maybe that's right. Yeah. Okay. One way or the other. You have a limited width, so you got to indent to make that structure apparent. And then a particular item might run onto a new line because you sort of get an expansion into Braille of more characters and you don't have much width. So then you got to have the indentation that reflects that it's not a new list item, it's a continuation of the line above. So it's been explained to me that you sort of work your way down the left margin with your fingers if you're trying to locate something or understand where bits and pieces are.
I'll throw in something here that I associate with Linus Torvalds. I might be wrong, but it goes like this. In the Linux kernel, you have 8 characters as the measure of indent. So whenever you indent your code, it's 8 characters, 8 spaces, then another 8 spaces, and another 8 spaces. And somebody said, well, what happens if you start going off the edge of the screen and there's not enough room to write your code? Oh, says Torvalds. Well, that's a sign that your function is too complicated, too deep nested, and you should refactor it. He also said, as I recall, that sometimes you have to fix things in a hurry, and there clarity and readability counts, and having the big obvious indents count there. Now, if you substitute read something in the dark for read something in a hurry, you're precisely in the blind situation.